I'm Liz. So I'll be talking today about a study of the PBS KIDS Measure Up and PBS KIDS Supervision App that we did. So although I'm giving this presentation, we have many contributors and collaborators that work with. Many of them are at CRESST, but also on this study we worked with Jeremy Roberts and Rosa Serratore from the Santa Monica High School District. So it's part of the Ready to Learn grant that this project is funded by. Focuses on low-income and underserved populations, and the Measure Up app was actually created in a previous iteration of the RTL cycle. So the Measure Up app, what is it? So the Measure Up app teaches measurement concepts of weight or height, length or height, and capacity. And it's for preschool age children between the ages of 3 and 5. It has 3 worlds, one for each domain, so one for length and height, one for weight, one for capacity. And within each of these worlds, they have the kids have videos, games, challenges, which are sort of like mini assessments that gamify mini assessments, toys, which are sort of open-ended, exploratory games that you just sort of explore. You don't have like a specific goal. And interstitial content that they watched when they were navigating between certain activities. And I should note that although the activities in Measure Up were intentionally sequenced in a certain order, the navigation of the app encourages the sequence but doesn't require it. So kids can play things in whatever sequence or watch things in whatever sequence they want and come back to things, skip around as they see fit. The supervision app, which was the other app that we looked at in this efficacy study, is a parent companion app. So it allows parents to basically see what their kids are doing when they're playing online. So they have a dashboard, they get information about what videos were watched, what games were played, what content was covered in those videos and games. And they also get suggestions for how they can extend these topics or this learning into real life. So for this study, we were looking at the extent to which playing Measure Up, with the parents either having the supervision app or not having the supervision app, impacted children's learning of the measurement concepts. We were also looking at does parents' use of the supervision app lead to any increase in awareness or support of their child's learning. And then the third one was just what is the behavior of the children when they're playing Measure Up? That's a little more of an exploratory question. So it was a pre-test, post-test randomized design study. The randomization was within site. We went to a couple different sites, which I'll talk about in the next slide. The intervention took place at school, so it was not in the wild in the kids' homes. We actually went out to school sites. And parents who were in the supervision condition received loaner phones to use at home. So they were ostensibly checking in on what their children were doing during the day on the supervision app at home. The intervention lasted 3 weeks, so the kids were, we went out and had them play 4 days a week for 20 or 30 minutes per occasion, and we had a total of 99 children and across the 3 conditions. So the control, who played literacy games, Measure Up, and then Measure Up, whose parents also checked the supervision app at home. So the 2 treatment conditions, when you saw the kids playing in class, were no different. So all the children who participated had to fit the sample criteria. So they were attending schools that were received Title I funding. Though we actually had a daycare center that was at a community college. But given the demographic information of the surrounding community, we felt like it fit the lower SES requirement. The children were either ages 4 or 5. And then we had to make sure that they had parents who read English, because the supervision app at that time was only available in English, and since it was randomized after participants agreed to participate, we had to make sure everyone could feasibly be in all conditions. So I will talk a minute about the development of the measurement assessment that we created, because it was actually kind of innovative, and that's the topic of this session. So there weren't a lot of assessments for us to use that were focused on measurement concepts for young children. There was the child math assessment that WestEd has created, but only 4 items had to do with measurement. And then there's the key math assessment, which had 3 items. So we actually ended up developing 13 additional items to cover the concepts that were in the PBS math framework for that age group and the topic of measurement. And we did 3 rounds of usability to make sure this was working. And we also consulted with Alex Klein, who was the CME creator. So the assessment was a one-on-one administration with the kids. It had 20 questions and took about 10 minutes. It was all sort of framed by the child math assessment protocol, which is you have a little dog, Sparky, and you say, this is Sparky, and I'm gonna tell you some things that Sparky wants, and you're gonna put things that he wants on the square we used. And so it was a bit of an adaptation, but we found that the kids were much more engaged with the dog than they were with just pointing to pictures, so we moved over to mainly using the dog. And so we used 10 items had manipulatives or things that the kids picked up and pointed to, and 6 items had pictures that they pointed to. And then we actually created an iPad Pan Balance app in-house to assess the kids on weight items, because there wasn't a great way to sort of, we tried a lot of physical pan balances, but they always seemed to have issues. Mainly that they weren't quite right, and so the kids would get really focused on the fact that it was like, so anyway, this is done pre and post intervention. So yeah, here I just, this is Sparky, and this is the CMA item where you're comparing the size of the 2 bones. We also had them order bones in order of height. We had them do non-standard measurement items where they measured things like sticks and pencils with paw prints and capacity. They could again compare, which bowl is bigger. And we had a displacement item we created about what happens to a water level when Sparky gets in the bathtub. And then the pan balance items. So we asked them, what are these things? What are these, and what do they do? And then we also had them tell us, which ball is heavier. And then in the app, they weighed bones and balls and that kind of stuff. So we also had parent measures. The whole sample took surveys pre and post, and they were mainly information about background, demographics, media usage, and also how familiar the children were with the characters. And then the parents who are in the supervision group also took weekly questionnaires asking them about their experience using supervision. So for our first research question, basically asking about the efficacy of supervision and Measure Up, we did ordinary least squares regression, predicting the post-test scores, controlling for pre-test, and then we included a variable for treatment, so either Measure Up or Measure Up plus supervision, and they're using a reference group as the control, and including various covariates. So the first model that I present here controls for pre-test, site, age, and gender. And we see that the effect of being the Measure Up condition was statistically significantly associated with the post-test score. And actually, the same for the Measure Up and supervision condition. It was also statistically significant. And then when we add in for model 2, low income, we can see that it's very significant. And so this tells us that children who were low-income children didn't have a different, it wasn't differently effective. So basically there was an 11% gain for the Measure Up group and a 9% gain for the Measure Up and supervision group. We did further significance tests and found no difference between Measure Up and supervision. So there really wasn't any difference with having the parents have supervision versus just have the kids play at school. It could be because we looked into how much the parents were actually playing and they weren't using it a whole lot, so it could just be that it was kind of the same. But we also estimated subscores with a hierarchical linear regression, and we found that they were gaining the most on the weight items. We're not entirely sure why, except that it's likely that it was the place that they was the most room for growth, because a lot of them didn't know what a pan balance was before, and so many of the games are very, focused on using a pan balance, so by the end they had a much better sense of, what a pan balance was and how you might use it. So we also looked at whether supervision led to changes in parents' behavior. We have, out of the 33 parents who were in that condition, we only had 30 of them. Who responded to the survey. But of that 30, 50% said that supervision did lead them to talk with their kids about what they were doing and measure up. The problem is, because this was at home and this is all self-report, we really don't know much else about that. We don't really know, how they talked about it, whether it was just like, I heard you did some game at school today, or what it was. But, at least we see that supervision is encouraging conversation about these, and we know from the literature that, having parents talk to their kids about what they're learning in school is a positive thing, so that's good. So for our last research question here, what is the gameplay behavior of children playing Measure Up? I just was going to show a little bit of what we can do with telemetry data and what we've done with telemetry data. We actually did so much, I just sort of cherry-picked some interesting stuff. But we use telemetry data, which is the back-end data, or the log data we get from all of the games. So every time a child clicks, submits the button, anything they do, PBS very nicely stores that all for us and shares it with us, and then we can make sense of it. So we do things like look at time spent in various games and various types of activities. We can look at time spent over time, like over the course of the intervention. We also look at error rates, which is basically just a measure of how difficult games are for kids or challenges are for kids. The bounce rate, how quickly they're checking out of games. And then, I don't have time to talk about it here, but if you were able to go to the Innovation Showcase and see our undergraduate researcher, Tiana Fang's awesome poster, they made measures out of this telemetry data to understand when children had misconceptions about using a pan balance. So we do a lot of cool stuff with telemetry data. I'm going to show you some descriptive stuff right now. So here, this is actually created by my colleague Thomas in the back row. Thank you, Thomas. This is the share of time spent by activity over the course of the intervention. So we can see that the games stay pretty high, though it changes day to day, sort of on average what children are doing. Interestingly, this blue line down here that kind of makes this very steep incline is an activity called Sticker Book, and kids weren't actually able to access the Sticker Book until later, so you can see it became pretty popular by the end. And then videos got kind of low, go higher. So this is a great way for us to sort of make sense of what they're doing, where when we're observing them in the classroom, because we did, and we took observation notes, we had an observation protocol and everything, we were able to capture sort of more just like who was co-playing with whom and who was excited, said, this is so fun, or whatever. But here we actually really get to figure out what they're doing day by day. So here is the bounce rate for all the games. So this is allows us to disaggregate. When we say like, oh, the kids quit before finishing the game, we're actually able to see, did they quit when they just opened the game and they said, it's not for me, and they click out? Or did they actually click around? Did they make some attempts? Did they make some attempts to actually get some rounds right? So we're able to figure out how they're doing. So we were able to give PBS feedback about why certain games had much lower completion rates than others, because they have the context for the game. So some games have very low completion rates, but that's more because it's just a really long game. So the kids play and they actually finish rounds, but they don't totally. Okay, I'm totally over time now. All right, well, that's okay. Ask me more. We can continue this conversation after. All right. Yes, Jared's going to continue the conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
So now as Jared gets his things ready up, this is Jeremy Roberts, and he's going to talk about novel research methodologies and the implications for PBS Kids as he gets his slides ready there. You're in the quick access desktop, right?
I don't see anything. Maybe open it early.
So I think he closed before, so I think go back to the desktop and get to the quick access desktop. That would be a crazy because he was concerned about having somebody else to make PowerPoint. But don't pass it. So go to the window. Well, I'm not going to touch it with that one. Not good at desktop. Okay. And now, Jared Roberts is going to discuss innovative research techniques, novel research methods.
And I'm mainly going to focus on the implications. Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy Roberts, Senior Director of Learning Technology at PBS KIDS Digital. And I'm basically going to be building on a lot of the stuff that Liz just shared and maybe layering on a little bit more detail. So my plan is to show you a bunch of examples, then I'm going to make a point. So, all right, let's see. Liz talked a little bit about the exploratory work inside supervision. I just want to interpret that in terms of implications for PBS Kids. Similarly, the detailed engagement analyses, I'm going to give more examples and talk a little bit more about some of the things that Liz showed. There's some really interesting exploratory analysis I want to share that the CRESST team did about relating specific gameplay activity to games. I'll talk about that a little bit. It's one of the most promising pieces of this. And then I want to go into a bit more detail than Liz was able to in terms of the work that CRESST did around detecting misconceptions. And I'll be peppering in implications the whole way. And I just wanted to lead off by saying thank you to everybody who designed the study, did the data collection, implemented it, and did all the data analysis on all the various pieces. I'm incredibly impressed with this work. So thank you, everybody. This gave a good background measure up. I'll just briefly restate. It's a tablet app for 3 to 5 year-olds focused on measurement. It's got a number of different kinds of activities that are possible: interstitials, video clips, games, custom assessments, open-ended sandboxes, and the product strategy here so that we can expose kids to concepts, model problem-solving behaviors with them, give them opportunity to practice, maybe even test them a little bit, and wrap it all up in this. That's something very thoughtful and integrated and intentional. It also can connect to that PBS Kids Supervision app to give parents into the activity that the kid is going for. And we really, the goal here is we wish to motivate parents to engage further with their kids' needs. So that's sort of the system. And, just from a sort of marketing perspective, there's gorgeous worlds, Treetop City, Magna P, Crystal Caves, and then over on the parent and engagement app side of things, really easy activity feed that you can go into to get some tips and some recommendations. If you're interested in graphs, you can see where your kid is sort of falling out on some kind of non-referenced rating, and we'll give you recommendations based on how they're doing and what that game is about and so forth if they're struggling. So the idea is to try to get this connected learning. From a kid's perspective, though, there's just a ton of games laid out in this awesome place that they can explore. From a component perspective, though, you can see how all the games and all the videos and all the pieces are sort of brought together into these worlds and zones, and it's all done thoughtfully so that one thing leads intentionally into the next. This is a library of content that we made as a part of the Ready to Learn grant, and then brought together into this one tablet app as an experiment to see if we could capitalize on this kind of products. Right? Okay, so that's the backdrop. I want to sort of just show a couple things about the supervision and usage. We have heard a lot of things from parents about what they are willing to do, what they're going to do, and then we see different things. We measure their actual metrics. behavior. This is fantastic for us because we can actually see how many parents actually sort of did the easiest thing and how many got through some of the more in-depth engagement with the parent companion app versus how few actually really clicked through to some of the external resources that we provide. This is fantastic for us from a product development standpoint because now we can take all of this knowledge and sort of focus our scrutiny and go back into the design phase of iterations, which is exactly what we're doing with that parent product. We didn't get the uptake we wished for this, and now we have a lot of really great intel informing our theories about why we may not succeed. And even more, so that's sort of aggregated, but this disaggregated, these are individuals now, and you can see each phase or each depth of engagement, and you can see a variety of parents and their activity across that population. You get a sense of maybe a third have a really robust engagement profile, and then maybe it trails off. And you can see how the individual usage might vary with activity. Just great intel for us feeding back into the product design. So, so touched on these bottom lines, but the implication here for us is, again, getting to the bottom of the discrepancy between what they tell us and what they'll actually do, and setting ourselves up in the future, because we wish to bring this parent engagement piece into an ecosystem with the kid and the parent and the caregiver and the educator all working together. As we move forward into that world, this helps us maybe relate the parent activity piece to any games that we see across the larger system. And setting ourselves up to be able to do that kind of work. Okay, new story. This is some of the detailed engagement analyses that the CRESST team was able to do. I'm going to switch gears and just talk about that. In Measure Up app, kids get to what it is they're going to do, which means we can kind of understand their activity areas and ways that should lend to differences and so forth. And as Liz mentioned, with the telemetry strategies we employ, we're able to look at quite a few detailed questions. So I'm just going to rapid fire go through a bunch of examples. Which videos get skipped before they complete? That helps us understand which videos are outperforming or underperforming in terms of engagement. We know what the videos are covering. We can cross-reference these pieces of information, and now we know a heck of a lot more about which components are contributing. Similarly, in a game, or these are the assessment challenges, or in the games, as Liz suggested, we can know depth of engagement. You start and you don't do anything, or maybe you do some stuff, but you don't really make any real attempts at solving the problem. Or maybe you do make some attempts, but you don't really succeed at solving any problem. Or maybe you actually get further than that and you do succeed at some of your attempts. And then eventually all the way through to how many kids will have finished the session completely. These are all, this is like a funnel, it's like thresholds of engagement with these things, and it's useful for us to understand how these interactives all compare with one another. And Liz mentioned this is disaggregated, there's a lot of disaggregated bits of data, but the truth is the unifying principle that allows us to aggregate them all back is the actual product strategy that we built this thing with. We know what we were intending to do, and that will give a great sense for whether or not I can succeed. Fantastic visibility and insight for us. Liz showed this. This is the average number of errors, so it's really interesting to see where are the errors happening, and maybe we could focus our scrutiny in on looking at particular mechanics or approaches and so forth. Also super useful. Let's see, the share of time spent for activity. 17. So which activity type is the most popular by share of time or least popular? What's the spread looking like there? It's really interesting to compare games to toys. Here, toys are the open-ended experiences, like sandboxes, and games are a lighter practice, but not so open-ended and more task-positive. Those seem to be the winners here. So it's just really looking at the ranking in kids' minds and how these things are going to starting to get a sense for the contributions that these things might make by time. Which activity type is most popular by average time? Not aggregate now. And the story here is sticker books. I'll come back to that again and again. Let's talk sticker books. Stickers are a big deal. And look at the sticker book outliers. Some kids are really like so it's yet another way to understand individual contributions. So which activity type is visible the most? I sort of classify as videos and games and toys and interstitials. Well, now I know by type what's going on. This has implications for which experiences are opened the most often and returned to the most often. So these are things that we care about a lot. Environment with a lot of choice for the kid. How much total time do the kids spend on each activity? So again, understanding total appeal and initial and return on the individual experiences. And when we, say again?
Sticker books really.
Oh, yes. Every single one. So, and we do feature analysis of these interactors with the CRESST team all the time. They'll really take a detailed look at what each of these components is on the inside. And when we have this level of visibility of how kids are using it, we can cross-reference those things. So if we wanted to, which characters are most important, or do these interactors have a song in them? We could ask all these questions and slice and dice this usage data. Super powerful. How much time do kids spend on each activity on average? Okay, so it's average session time is different than the total time average. Similar implications though. For me, I'm thinking about comparing and contrasting a higher number of shorter engagement experiences or a smaller number of larger engagement experiences and comparing them. These are questions we never have been able to tackle before. And it ties into a whole line of questions that we have about dosage. We always are asked when we're doing the study, okay, as the designer, what do you think the dosage is required? And the answer is we don't know. We use engagement time as a proxy, but maybe now we could get into some more detail about the timescales to learning, timescales to degradation, and is learning continuous in this operationalization, or is it discontinuous? Are there aha moments? These are all things that I think we can start to go after now, this kind of approach. How varied is the amount of time kids put into the games? How often are the activities visited? There's just a lot of stuff possible in here. And how does the average time spent vary over time? At World Zero, it should be still. Look at that, dominating towards the end. Which there may be a story there, right? The other things become known to the kids because they're fixed, but the sticker book allows the kid to express themselves, tell their own story. So there may be something really interesting going on here that we can pursue now. Share time spent. Okay, I want to make sure to get to a couple of the other things, and I think I've only got a couple minutes left. 4 minutes. All right, so let's see. 25. That's important. So how does the share of time spent, different activity types vary over time? Do any die off? You can see our challenge, our poor little assessment challenges kind of die off with sticker books coming on like a dartboard. And again, sort of the ranking, were things balanced over time, or did some things die, and does it have to do with what they are, or all super interesting and potentially answerable now. And now, more sticker books. 3 minutes left. I think I'm going to. How does the time spent in the different activity types vary across study participants and across time? So this is interesting because with here, you sort of get to see the variation. And did some things stop varying or increasingly vary over time? By individual component. So this is super interesting. Like, if we zoom in one more level, we can see features here and there. What are these spikes later on in the study? Were researchers mentioning individual products? Were the curatives influencing each other in terms of what they were going to play because they had choice? We can sort of see the patterns over time and how it developed. Super interesting stuff. Average time, which components invite increased engagement over time or decreased engagement over time. Has the average number of individual activities visited vary over time? And so, okay, I said I was going to make a point. This kind of stuff really helps us understand how the content's getting used, and that's visibility we didn't have before. And we're starting to pilot this kind of analysis in the design phase and in the iteration phase with real rapid cycle question and light answer with this kind of data analysis. And it's really working. It's early, but it's really working well for us so far. Our instructional designers have gotten a taste for this kind of intel, and now they're all over and they're asking questions all the time, which is fantastic. So I feel like we're really growing. And then, yeah, let's just kind of chat. Okay, new story. Relating specific gameplay to games. With all the 20 assessment items, we can see that some of them, for example, on the measure up condition or measure up supervision condition, some of them are really doing pretty well, and that sort of tracks what those are saying. We can aggregate a bunch of them by type and what they're focusing on, and again, we sort of see the same pattern here, but where it gets interesting is that we can also identify the kids that had the most gains on those items, and we can look at their pre-post, and we can look at what they did in the app. And so when taken together, we actually know where the gains were achieved, which individuals achieved them, and what their actual activity was. And we know what the intent of those individual activities were, so we can cross-reference and say, was it true that the things they did line up with what they learned? And the picture that emerges is, yes, in fact, that's connect, which is fantastic. So we can isolate gains, isolate individuals, isolate activity, and relate them all. We can connect the dots. That's huge for us. And then finally, detecting misconceptions. The CRESST team has this amazing paper. It's Matt's 1993, Preschoolers and Band Balances. And it does this great job laying out how preschoolers approach band balances, the misconceptions they might harbor, strategies they might employ, and the indicators that you might see if they harbored some of these misconceptions. And so they map the interaction space, developed some algorithms to, if you took certain pathways through the interactive, we have pretty high confidence you have that misconception. And they were able to show that some of the kids in the study would have set off that misconception detector and cross-reference that with their gains or their post tests on the weight items. And you can see that the higher is heavier misconception actually really does significantly negatively correlate. So we're talking about standing on the existing literature, detecting a misconception through telemetry, and cross-referencing that with impediments to the learning of gains and the external criteria. That's huge for us. Okay, so all of this is to say that we have a new lens and a new microscope and the tools to take a look at these things. These are questions we were not able to tackle before, and now we can tackle them. And it's exciting for us. Thank you.
Okay, so now Naomi is going to try to find her presentation. See how that works. And Naomi's from EDC, who with SRI are the evaluators of the Large Ready to Learn project. We're going to talk about accidental innovation, media use, and early learning settings.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I was just thinking I might be the only presentation without a table. Let's go. Giving this a lot of thought, I've been working closely with Jer and Liz and Greg and others on the Ready to Learn project. We've been spending a lot of time thinking about how to assess and how to support learning. And trying to talk about an innovation in assessment was, I found for myself really frustrating, and so I decided not to talk about it because I knew others would be. And instead thought I'd talk about something else that we've seen over many years. I've had the really good fortune to work on this project for 10 years, perhaps the longest in this room. Looking back over the 10 years, something that we try and remember, or that I think is important for us to remember, and sometimes I forget, is that sometimes innovation happens when you're not looking for it or when you don't expect it. And something that we started seeing in 2009 with our first study, we kind of found as almost an annoying and funny outcome, which we've over time learned to take on as actually really interesting innovation, and now we're hoping to build on it more. So in 2009, we ran a study, the Ready to Learn initiative was focused on literacy outcomes, and we ran a study, a randomized control trial study, looking at how children's early literacy learning developed after being exposed to a set of resources that were from PBS that focus on literacy.
So our intervention was literacy, our countervention was science. We tried to do something that was completely different, but still equally involved in digital resources. Fortunately, we had positive findings for literacy, but we also had really interesting positive findings for the science, which surprised us. And the most interesting piece of that came out not from our instrument, but from our informal conversations and running into the same teachers over and over again, all the way through to 2013 when we did a math study, with teachers coming back and telling us that they found the resources so useful that they continued to use them. They were all we created a whole bunch of DVDs, and they were still playing their DVDs in their classrooms. Particularly the ones about science, which use Sid the Science Kid. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's an animated experience where there's a teacher and they're a small group of kids. It's not a realistic elementary or a pre-K classroom setting. They're very few kids. But what you see in it is teachers engaging in discourse with young children. Often they're asking questions. They're letting children ask questions. They're letting children try and answer each other's questions. And they're trying to explore or create experiments to answer their own questions. And what teachers found was this was really engaging, and it gave them a model for how to engage with their children in those same kinds of activities. Even though they heard, you should talk to your children, you should ask open-ended questions, you should engage kids in talking with each other and with you. How do you do that was really a challenge, and we didn't realize how much of a challenge it was. But we did realize when teachers started talking to us that providing them with a visual model made a difference, and teachers latched onto that and used it. They used it for themselves, and they also used it in their classrooms as a model to show their kids how we could all engage in discourse. So it wasn't exactly an annoyance that we found that. We wish we would have found more of that for the literacy, but the resources we were using for literacy didn't provide that. We just kind of filed it away. It's interesting. And then we made a series of videos talking to teachers about it, which are available if anyone wants to see it. But we kind of had it hanging around. Fast forward to 2013, where the focus of Ready to Learn switched to math. And we conducted, I just say the preschool literacy study, maybe it's obvious, it was in preschool settings. So we were working with preschool teachers. The PBS KIDS transmedia math study also took place in pre-K settings. This one focused on early math learning. And again, we started with teachers. This information is so useful, it's giving me information about math learning that's developmentally appropriate that I didn't know. This is, it's almost like real professional development in terms of understanding the kinds of concepts that I can introduce to my kids in math beyond basic counting or addition and subtraction. And so again, we heard the same story. And we found at the end that teachers who were engaged in the study in the intervention really felt like they increased their beliefs, their sense of self-efficacy as math teachers, or their understanding about math teaching. So this sort of was our second reminder that, teachers need more information, especially pre-K teachers. And the digital resources are really providing that. And so by the time we got to our 2015 study, which took place in homes, we really started to think about the role of digital media for young children differently. It wasn't just for children, or to help teachers teach children. It was to help teachers or adults working with kids better understand what it was that children could learn, and help those adults figure out how to present it to children in ways that made sense. And so, this goes back to thinking about two-generation learning. When you're talking about young children, they're never learning in isolation. They're always learning in the context of the adults around them, whether it's their parent or their teacher or care provider. So for 2015, we created a very minimal set of videos. They were between 1 and 3 minutes, I think, for parents about talking to kids about math, or how to use digital resources to support learning for young children. And we made that part of the experience. It was optional. We didn't require teachers to actually go and look. But in our back-end data, what we saw was that the videos that we created for parents were accessed on never more than once by a parent. Some parents didn't access them at all. But no one spent time going back and looking at them over and over again. And yet, what we saw was an increase in parents in our intervention feeling a sense of greater knowledge about how to support math learning or how to use digital resources to support learning. So we felt like what we were seeing is a tiny nudge or a tiny, nugget of information is enough to tip parents over the edge to feel like they have a little bit of something and they know how they can address their kids or support their learning. At the same time, there's a lot of information out there about how much screen time kids are engaged with. So kids under 8, on average, 1 hour and 20 minutes a day. That's a lot, right? There are also more calls for building on learning sciences to create better resources for young children that ensure that we're taking what we know about how kids learn and using it when we create apps and other digital media. So we were thinking about all this in the context of what we're seeing, how parents, how teachers are taking the resources that we're presenting in our studies, and we're kind of throwing it all together and massaging it to think about what this means for the work that we do and how we present and how we think about digital resources for young kids. This all led to a study that some of you may have seen us present earlier last night or yesterday afternoon. What parents talk about when they talk about learning, a national survey of children, which looks at how parents think about themselves as supporters of their children's science learning, among other things. And not a surprise, what we found is that parents of young children are not confident in supporting science learning for their young kids. They're less confident in that than they are in teaching, for example, literacy or math. Interestingly, just before our study came out, another study came out saying that a study of pre-K teachers, when asked about their confidence level in teaching various subject areas, also were less confident in teaching science than in teaching other areas like math or literacy. So we were starting to see this convergence of events, which is that young children's parents don't feel confident teaching science, young children's teachers don't feel confident teaching science. So what do you have? You have a gap, obviously. Maybe that's a gap that digital resources can fill. If that's the case, we need to think about and make sure we're paying attention to digital resources in a way that ensures their quality and content is very high, because this is sort of like a high-risk situation. This is the only place where kids may be getting some science content, and they're adults as well. And so we started to think about, what does that mean? How do we make sense of digital resources and content in a way that addresses children, but also the adults in their lives, so that they can get as much information out of them as possible. Fortunately, we were also asked, or we were involved with a small task as part of this large Ready to Learn initiative, to do a review of science content to ensure that it was high quality for use by public television stations across the country. So this led us to think, well, this is a great opportunity. We're going to create a set of criteria that we think people can use to really measure whether or not science content that's digital resources for kids meets a high level of quality, so that it can support early learning and it can support the adults who are engaged with children in their everyday lives and help them to be more exposed to high quality science content. I know this is impossible to read, but I hadn't shared it with anyone. Let's see. This is easier to read. We came up with 9 criteria, and I will start by saying we didn't expect that an average teacher would say, like, oh, I'm going to use these 9 criteria to judge everything that I might show my kids. That's not a reasonable request. But we do think that it's useful for people who are perhaps in education director positions, looking at resources to bring into their settings. But we also think it could be really important for people who are developing content to think about. So when you're developing content for young children, first of all, keep in mind that you're going to be probably having your content support adults who work with those young children as well. And second of all, to ensure that it really is aligned to what is considered high quality based on a number of documents, including a PBS developed framework for science learning, which incorporates next generation science standards as well as Head Start science standards for young children. These are the kinds of things you want to consider. So I'll quickly go over, feel free to ask me questions, but obviously starting with a specific science concept is important, and you would be surprised how many people are presented with science videos that actually don't identify any kind of science content that you're supposed to focus on. So being explicit about what the focus is always important, especially for young children. Science or engineering practices are focused, and they're modeled, and they're supported through modeling. And science practices are presented in conceptual learning context and shown as the best way to advance science learning. So these are the 3 things that our reviewers decided were the most sort of core pieces. So if you got a check on all of these, then you could continue to look at the rest, where you fell in this set of criteria. If you didn't pass those first 3, then they kind of booted that out. So we had a set of reviewers, a couple of experts in science, young children in science, as well as a large group of graduate students, which were provided through a partnership through PBS, who were fantastic, and they reviewed probably 1,600 plus resources, individual resources, games, videos, some video clips, to try and really get a sense of what was out there. They, spent time looking across readings to make sure that there was some consensus about how they were viewing these. And so these have been refined and shortened as much as possible. We would prefer to have fewer than 9, but these came to be through a rather extended process. And again, I'm happy to share all that. But then once you pass the first 3, then moving on, science concepts and practices are represented in multiple ways, always important. Science phenomena are relevant and depicted realistically. Something that we often see is that science, it's a black box, so you have the thing and then it comes out as the other thing, and there's the magic that happens. And so trying to get away from that and trying to give more information, again, development to appropriate information. Vocabulary we found to be very important and often missed for young children. Children encouraged to make connections. Again, this is really important between the screen and the outside world. For children and adults, but making sure that whatever you're doing, you can help the viewer or the participant find connections to their real lives. Is always important. And children encouraged to continue exploration of phenomena, again, outside in the real world. And then supporting children's scientific thinking, regardless of whether their answers are right or wrong. And this is something that we found to be really important. So a response that just says wrong answer in a game or in another kind of experience, we found not to be as supportive of science practices as a response that says great thinking, have you considered X? And that's of course hard in an environment that you're creating that's sort of a standalone and doesn't have human engagement, but just trying to think about ways to do that so that children are encouraged to think creatively, are encouraged to think in scientific ways and not sort of shut down when they have a wrong answer. And so that was our accidental innovation that led to this, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
So thank you, Naomi. Now we're going to hear from Rosa Serratore. And she's ready to go. Hers is already up, so the quickest transition is.
In 30 minutes?
Wait, now we're back to yours.
This one is you.
Yes. Yes. Let's just do this.
Here.
And I can do this. Good morning. I'm not a researcher, as most of you in here are, where you're doing these wonderful analytics, which I agree with everyone before me saying how important it is to really get to the crux of what you're studying so that you can ramp it up, because right now we're trying to figure out how do we make access, excellence and equity much more accelerated in our world, and that is definitely part of our math world in public education. So I'm Rosa Serratore, and I am the pre-K-12 math coordinator for the school district and also the president of the Southern California Math Council. And I say that because some of what we've been hearing here today and yesterday definitely resonates with what the needs are for people teaching young kids mathematics, but also all the other grades ahead of it. As a school district, we're bound by the local control accountability program plan. So anything that fits these goals, we can fund. So ours, we chose these 3 out of a good number of them. The only thing that is unique to our district is that we included saying the word socially just and being culturally and linguistically responsive, culturally responsive practices. That is to our district, but I'm going to tell you that in the math world, both locally, statewide, and nationally, grappling with being equitable, accessible, and empowering children of mathematics is big in our world. Our particular superintendent has asked us to look at it in this way, creating systems of accountability, and then I think a lot of school districts are working on that, and you'll hear the word professional learning community. So trying to do the smaller version in a school site to match what is the goal for a
whole district, and then looking at the overall achievement in state accountability, which for Santa Monica Mel, who are preliminary data of our 11th graders of an assessment that's supposed to deem our kids college and career ready. We only, according to this measure, are only 50% of our 11th graders are right now ready for college or career, and it doesn't sit well for many of us. And if you disaggregate the data further by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, it's an even uglier mess. And then obviously, the English assessments always outperform our math. So we do have a lot of room to grow. Then we don't just sit on just local data, we also take to heart things like the PISA assessment. And what I liked about this was the fact that somehow this assessment has questions that get at the attitudes and beliefs of the kids. And I think some of that is unique to the United States, because you'll have adults readily say, I'm not good at math, I wasn't good at math, yet they'll never say that about English. And kids do internalize that. There was a piece of data once by third grade, especially for girls, they internalize how their mothers think of math. And I came from someone whose parents did not have a lot of education, but math was definitely my mother's thing according to her, so I internalized that. And I didn't realize the discrepancy in achievement that way based on different segregations prior to going to school myself. So in our district, to grapple with that, because top-down never really works, we have, especially at the elementary level, what I found, because I taught secondary, is that you have teachers who log onto the textbook and that is it, or they want to create everything themselves. So it's real important that when they're creating everything themselves, there's some great stuff to draw from that comes from you guys. So we are definitely push the cognitively guided instruction philosophy, but the teachers are able to draw from some of their items, some of our adopted curriculum, and then we're really grappling with formatively assessing along the way. So what resonates with teachers of young students? I'm finding that if it's anchored to something that they know, which a lot of times is teaching literacy, English and reading and writing, and you fill in some of the math in there, you are able to engage the kids and also make it doable for the teachers of young kids to say, okay, I can teach this math. So this is one of our early learning math coaches, and she is doing describe, draw, describe. And you can't tell here, but in that is the book itself. So a lot of times if you can create something where the book and the audio can match and give people ideas, a lot of what Naomi said definitely resonated with me, because it becomes a PD for the teacher and for the community at large. So the kids are asked they're reading the book with the teacher, but the questions are what's underneath, what's beside, what's above, below. So you have all those positional things which help with the spatial visualization, a little of the geometry, all through storybooks. So everybody loves to read stories to kids, but here you are incorporating the mathematics in there. And then she was also doing a three-dimensional version where you see, I'm telling you what to put together, and the kids are over here creating it by her description, which part of what I'm seeing as my role here today is to let you know some of these things could become more of an app, game-like thing that would definitely be used by our educators. Kids love this kind of stuff, and teachers would love being able to access it. There is more stuff out there in math than ever before, and there's a huge math community out there. So a lot of teachers are doing sense-making routines such as which one doesn't belong. And you're saying, well, where's the math in that? Well, if they have to explain which one doesn't, and usually all of them do, or you can leave a blank one and they have to decide to make one that doesn't. You're hearing the language from kids, so they're able to access the math in different ways. You can do it in various languages, and obviously these are pictorial, but you can put numbers in, odd numbers, even numbers. The other thing that teachers are really globbing onto, because there is more and more technology in the classrooms themselves, just within the last 5 years. It used to be you'd go and see an interactive board and you're like, ooh, now it's like a requirement. So they're loving things like, I always forget what this is. This is Seesaw, because the kids can actually teach themselves and they upload, so they become the teacher, and then the teacher, him or herself, can also get a sense of what the kids know and don't know by hearing the little snippets. They also use something like Flipgrid, where you can just a little video snippet. It just is more engaging, so even though it could be the same as filling in a worksheet, it has a different element to it that gets the kids thinking more innovatively. And then I always thought that our elementary teachers were the pros at doing centers. And that's true to a large degree, but there's a real globbing on to using blended learning. Some people are calling it balanced learning now, where basically you're more strategic with your centers because you want to get at like almost formally assessing them at each center. But one of the centers is usually a technology component. And in that technology component, they're looking for good apps that match what the content is. They're looking for a little video clip that can help the kid make sense or see the math in a different light. So that's pretty cool to see. And as I mentioned, there's more and more stuff out there. Graham Fletcher out of Georgia doing what is called 3-app tasks. And that's an offshoot from Dan Meyer. If anyone saw Dan Meyer's TED Talk a number of years ago now, The Makeover of Mathematics. And it's basically, you show a little video clip, and this is this guy opening up these pea pods. And you ask questions like, what do you notice? What do you wonder? You get kids to formulate the questions. And then the thing I like about it is they're asked to estimate what would be the answer if you were to put all these P's together. What would be a low answer, a high answer, just right answer? And you're wrapping up the rigor of the math and the thinking process just by simple little questions like that, which by bringing the 3 acts to teachers, they might not have thought of that. They think like estimation is simple. That really ratchets up when you're asking kids to estimate. And then Andy Federer is another one who has a lot of notice and wonder, because the counting isn't just simple. You can do all kinds of properties that go with the counting. The neat thing about the standards that exist in a lot of the states, and definitely here in California, is that there are 8 mathematical practices, 3 of which actually have an intersection with the EL and the next generation science. And number 1 is persevering with their problem solving skills. So really, that's almost like a reverse thinking for the teachers, because they're always like scaffold everything. Show 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is asking, don't save the child right away. So when I was seeing the challenge part of one of those games, I'm like, oh, what was it that didn't get them to persevere with that particular part of that particular game? But this is important to us to have kids be able to draw from past problems and be able to keep going with it. 3 is another one. We heard yesterday that the workplace wants people who can express what they know and what they need to a group, and math is no exception to it. The teachers also like anything that has to do with speaking and listening, that has, get the kids talking. So 3 is the construct dialogues and critiquing that of others. And 6 is interesting because people think precision means just precision with computation, but it's also with language. Anything we could do to encourage language use, academic language, whether it's learning to summarize, give an example, counterexample, describe, synthesize, these kind of words that you can use no matter what the subject matter is always a plus and much needed. So to that end, teachers are doing these bigger, like little performance tasks, which I can see also being done with an online cool story. When we're saying, what was that one particular game that engaged the kids? Take them through. So they're creating, I think they're creating a party here. So what do they need? How many stickers are they going to get for getting the party, the low budget? Who knows? I mean, I'm just thinking now. I have to listen to you guys. But then again, the math practices, these are the teachers trying to make them sensible to the kids, so they want the kids to internalize it. And then again, the math math language. They're giving sentence strips to them. How can you express yourself? My strategy was, I can prove it because, and these are little kids talking like this. If you provide them the tools, and then you'll slowly take it away. And then there are a lot, like I said, there are a lot of technological pieces out there in the math world now. And then in our district and in a lot of educational settings, we are trying to be action researchers ourselves. I have a group of math teacher leaders meeting where we are looking at our own data, and we are trying to figure out, okay, so what is it that both quantitative, state data, and anecdotal, what are the teachers saying they still need more of? And we are analyzing, seeing what are the critical areas of their particular grade they struggle with, and then coming back and thinking, okay, what's the next step in this? Is it really another test they need? And if it is, what is the format of it? Is it performance? Is it maybe just short? It doesn't have to be a multiple choice. Although the challenge too is, how do you find time to do big quality PD with teachers, which is why I agree with Ms. Naomi Hupert that we do need sometimes the gamification of math or using some of these apps judiciously will help with that. We also struggle in having the teachers come together and then actually doing some of this besides a small group that is a representative group, and we're a middle-sized district. You can only imagine how hard that is in a much larger district. I want to add one other thing, that with every other year it seems that teachers are learning something new. So it's next generation science now. So as we're doing the next generation science rollout, my big thing is make sure we include the math. Even all this STEM and STEAM, whatever we want to call it, there's the math. Why does that bridge stand up? I feel sometimes in the math world really feels that sometimes the M gets short shrifted, and these engineers are going to need their math to actually go the next step. So on that note, thank you very much for all that you do and helping us with our action research, because we rely on your information to bring back also your write-ups. And some of that I'm like, yeah, I could have told you that, but it's important to have it be done in a good professional way where it has a lot more tooth to it than just Rosie, I could have told you that.
I'm going to ask each of our presenters to sit. And the chair's over here. Oh, what happened? There was 4 chairs before. Well, we'll just pull another one. They're kind of locked together. There were 4 together before. Okay, and meanwhile, I am going to switch out. Brilliant. So, as I said, I'm going to try to have a couple of themes that we're going to talk through for a second, for a couple of minutes, and then have some open questions. And I did change this a little bit from last time, guys. So just a little bit changed based on what you guys said. So for a couple minutes, probably start with Liz and Jeff for this question, although of course, Rosa and Naomi, I'd like to hear from you if you have additions to that. Is we heard a lot about what's happening today, right? But what do we think is the future of not only measuring, but making sense of, right? You sort of a lot of graphs that were not that easy to make sense of necessarily, right? Of how children learn from and use media and technology, right? I actually had the opposite order, but I switched it because it's really more important than actually learning anything from it. And the use seems to be should be subservient to that. So I just like to know what you guys, what's the future of measuring, making sense of, how students learn from and use technology?
I can start. Well, I think that whether or not a graph is useful for understanding what it means is actually really subjective. And I think that you may not have the same kind of knowledge about the product as the people that sort of worked on it for 6 months, and they might take those same graphs and the media might really jump out at them because they know, for example, that bubble bath has this pattern in it where you really can play 70 levels, and therefore maybe it's not that big of a deal for bubble bath that kids are not completing the session but are getting all the way to the point where they're achieving some success. The relative importance of that, I think, is like for bubble bath might not be that important, but for another game might be very important. But again, I guess really the point I'm making is that it can't be
divorced. Like if you look at the graph and you say, oh, I don't know what the utility of that is, it's because you're missing like a key piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we bring those key pieces? And so specifically, really, I'm saying the intent in the design needs to be a part of the analytical equation. It needs to be the context that you use when you're evaluating the raw data results.
Yeah, I think, we did all this telemetry, which gives us a really great insight into, the engagement and how they're using the product with 99 kids. But I think if we, and what Jared's saying is like, you only can see, like you might not know if you haven't played all these games a billion times,
Right.
what it means. But if we had a much bigger corpus of games where we could start generalizing across and looking at different features across games, then it might actually be the case that we could say, this is a common feature that these games have, and it seems that children are, bouncing before they finish any rounds. But I think right now with the, and also because we have 99 children and 11 games, we don't have quite the capacity to do that. But I think that is where we can be headed, and that's where we'd like to be headed, I think.
The data collection capability that we have now far outstrips our bandwidth for analysis. And so one of the key challenges that we're just is how do you expand that bandwidth? We have some ideas, and we'll be working through a plan in the next 12 months. Maybe there's an opportunity for data jams where there are questions and data sets maybe semi-public in safe, private ways, so that we can federate the analysis, that kind of thing. Or how can we get a wider community of brains working and chewing?
Does anyone else have
in regards to the PBS kids, was there any pre and or post data in regards to the parents, specifically like their SES status, which could adversely impact how they use technology and thereby how their kids use technology, because that could adversely impact the data?
So we did collect data on their income, and
It's optional, right?
it was optional. So we actually had, so if you saw those two models I had up there, I didn't want to slow down, but in fact it was a smaller n because some people just didn't want to answer. So we found that there was no difference for children who were categorized as low-income children in the gains that they made. But it's also a pretty small sample size, all things considered.
In the technical report that CRESST generated based on that study, it shows the sampling strategy and the recruitment and citing strategy and the predominantly Title I folks, and you can sort of get a sense for the percentages of low SES versus not, so you can kind of see. As for the technology piece, I believe the treatment conditions provided all the required tags.
We did.
Sort of sidestep that.
And in fact, we asked them background questions about their media use, and it was they all use media. So we didn't actually see any differences.
I'm going to move on to the next theme, if I may. Is that okay with you all? Is there anything else burning to say here? Okay. So we talked a lot about the use of technology, how it's being used, but really what are and Rosa talked about this a bit more, and Naomi as well, and what are the productive roles of technology for young learners, right? Perhaps technology should be in charge, doing everything for learners, right? And today, in this conference, we've been talking a lot about social equity. We know that young learners, it's very important that they engage in a lot of collaboration. Naomi talked a bit about links to the outside world. I think you did as well, Rosa, on technology and how you take that. So kind of what do you see as people who are designing technology or thinking about using technology in their research in their classrooms? What do you guys think are really the most productive roles for technology? I think we'll start with Rosa.
Well, I learned recently that for our early learning classes, we have a policy that it's only supposed to be used for research, collaboration, and for kids to communicate among each other. So kind of like that whole seesaw piece. And, those are the three main ways, because there is a concern of too much screen time. It was interesting when we were doing the Measure Up, because there was the English only component for the parents. We had some of our non-English speaking parents claiming their kids were going to miss out and they felt bad that they couldn't sign off on this. And we had to have this whole meeting to say, no, once the study is done, your child will also be able to play the game. But there was this real fear that their kid would miss out. However, the English speaking, that's where we got most of the, and I don't have assignments, they already have to two ends, which we find a lot.
Naomi, what would you say you're all thinking in terms of corrective roles for technology?
So, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said because kids spend too much time in front of screens. I think most of us would probably agree with that. But the reality, of course, we know is that kids do spend a lot of time in front of screens. And so I would say that making it function in the best way possible to support learning across all areas is, is what we must do because that's where kids are spending a lot of time if we want to be sure. And it often happens for kids who are in their least resourced communities or who have least access to a lot of other kinds of resources because of, whatever circumstances are in their families. Those are the kids who spend a lot of time staring at screens, and those are the kids who probably also could benefit the most from having, a much richer exposure to things like science or math or, other kinds of experiences like about their community or other communities. So I think there are benefits to using it in those circumstances. I don't think we shouldn't assume that that's what's teaching children. I think we should assume that people are teaching children. But in the absence of that, when it can't happen, we should make sure that we have really good content to fill in.
I'll add that the way that we view the word technology is pretty broad. So I would start even with like television and reaching the kids in the first place, giving them characters that they know and that they love, and worlds that they instantiate in their head. And these are the ingredients of motivation and incentive. And then they want to engage, and they do. But I think there's a real important role for technology to play, surprisingly, in getting kids off the screen and out into the real world. I think we're focused on science right now as part of some of our activities. And we have strategies where we try to get the kid to actually stop and go out into the backyard, the park, and you can use a smartphone as a magnifier with a camera and taking pictures of leaves and bugs, and there's all sorts of interesting things you can do where you bring tech with you out into the world, or maybe the tech is actually the jumping off point. It's no tech now, and you're just off doing something.
Anyone about this?
Well, I'm just thinking, obviously, these are all colleagues of mine too in the world of public media. And, we kind of live in the informal learning space, with schools, but in homes and in community centers and in housing authorities and in faith-based programs and after-school programs. So I'm trying to think about the equity piece and the collaboration piece with the community and where the technology tool and the resource can, I think as Naomi was mentioning, enrich different environments and bring other kinds of assets to kids because they're in all sorts of spaces with their parents and on their own. And I think it can play a role in, helping environments that might be less full of rich resources have more resources.
Yeah, I just want to suggest that screens in and of their own characteristics, is that alone enough to be bad that it's a screen? Or is it really the design or what the intent of what's on the other side of the glass? Who is responsible for what's on the other side of that glass, and what are they trying to accomplish? So if you look at something like television, which had a similar ad rap for a while, and then maybe someone like Mr. Rogers comes along and shows that you can wield this particular technology for good. And so I think there's even more scrutiny of who is on the other side of the glass and what they're intending.
So this one is a bit of a related question, but a little bit different. What should the roles of parents and teachers be in young children's technology use? I know often we think of it in a lot of homes, including sometimes mine, when you actually give the kid the iPad because you're trying to make dinner and you can't sit with them, right? But there's also better roles for teachers and parents than that as well. So as we're thinking about designing technology or evaluating technology or using technology, what do we see as the roles of parents and teachers? And again, I'm going to say carry through some of the themes that we've had here, right? In terms of promoting social equity, in terms of promoting collaboration, and again, helping the children promote what they're learning to the outside world. Perhaps Rosa starting?
Well, I was going to say there's huge pressure on PBS Kids because I think you have a product that is known and valued by the communities out there, that it's not a hard sell. Hey, do you want to check out this PBS Kid app and see, validate it, see if it does do it does? Because the feeling is there's been a lot of thought put in it that it's more likely than not going to provide there's a trust there. Having said that, I think it's also important for the equity piece is sometimes you get these apps, or even the one that we were talking about in one of my slides. So there's a free component that the teachers are using. I said, well, what happens when you max out whatever they're offering you with the free component? Mm-hmm. As a district, we haven't put monies for that type of a tool. We've got Google for educators that is unlimited space. They can do any kind of collaboration. So I think part of the equity piece comes to also the monetary piece. How can you continue to provide quality apps like you guys have been describing here today and make it accessible in terms of finances for everybody? And that's including school districts.
And when teachers are using technology, how do you kind of model specific roles? Are there several roles, any roles that you find are more productive for them to take than others?
I'm mostly seeing the teachers maybe front load doing a whole class piece with it, but then the kids basically get to do their own thing. Sometimes you'll get a report, and the teachers like the reports to see where the kids got stuck or not stuck. So that's a nice feature that they actually. But ease of use is very important. If it's cumbersome, they're gonna let go of it. And and I don't know if maybe that little challenge thing was a little cumbersome for the kids. I don't know what stopped them from going further with it, other than not being able to get more stickers by going. Maybe they get 10 stickers if they continue that one. They get more for the challenge.
Are you available for So I have an opinion on this, just my own opinion. Maybe this is antiquated, but I happen to believe that these machines are supposed to be doing our bidding, at least for now. And I think there's a role for the teacher or the parent and so forth. If we've ever seen a kid gloss over when they're watching a TV show or get into the zone with some not productive tablet app, I feel like we should be breaking that. And I think we should be setting expectations for the kids. They shouldn't be waiting for the thing. The thing should be waiting for them. And so I think there's ways to view the role of technology in the lives of the kid that is relatable to the kid that we could be going after.
And I think for the parent role, what we saw with supervision is that they were really excited about all the things that supervision could do. Yeah. But when it came down to it, I didn't show all these slides, but Jared did. We had telemetry on what they actually did.
The truth.
And they didn't really do that much. Yeah. So, as much as they really thought it was awesome, and I'm a parent and I looked at all those things, I was like, yeah, that's pretty awesome. I don't know if, we. So I think the interesting thing for the parent role is it can't just sound good and be good theoretically. It has to somehow be able to be integrated in a useful way into their life. And that seems like a really hard nut to crack. Because,
not to make excuses, but I have friends of 4-year-olds now. And it's a full day getting to work, dropping the kids off, coming home, that being able to put them on something they know is going to not be detrimental, because I know a few of my friends have turned off some videos because they could tell their kid was going a little wacky with the videos they were watching. So, but I'm not surprised they want, it's good intention, but then they get dinner, you do the bath, you put them to bed, and it's all over again. And it's tiring. So
we did a couple of studies where we asked parents, would you use this? Here's the features. Do you like this? Would you use it? Yes, I would love that. I would use it. And sort of checks this box in their head. If I use that, I would be a good parent. It's very inspirational. Then you watch what they actually do, and it doesn't line up, and you wonder what's true, what's actually going on. And so we actually got to the point on our third
go around where we ask parents to diagram their busy day and draw it all, and before we showed them anything. And then we asked them, okay, now circle the parts of your day where you actually do parenting activities. We've got a couple of circles there. We put that away. Then we looked at the product features. Oh, yes, I love this. I would use this. And then we said, okay, now break out your day and point where in your day would you use it. And finally, we got to the point where some of them were like, yeah, okay, maybe I wouldn't use it. So finally, so we got to the truth.
So that's interesting. So even if you have aspirational roles for parents, how do we make it, exactly what Liz said, right? So it fits into that. We can't give them something else to do in their day. It has to somehow fit the day they have.
And
we haven't quite cracked that
We
nut yet.
can't give them what we think they can use. We have to start where they are.
I think that's really the important piece, which is that, many of us are parents, we make assumptions about what we should have done or what other parents should be doing. But I know from my own experience, or like thinking about professional development, people, someone who chooses to take a class in something, you only engage when you think that it's going to serve your needs. And while I may think these are meeting your needs as a parent, you personally don't see that connection. And I think one of the things we're not doing well with our resources, and maybe we'll get there, is how we ask parents, sort of like the micro needs that they might have, and just provide just that much and not more, because we know that's overwhelming and that you can't really deal with it. But how it can address just a specific thing, but also the thing in a context. So I think one of the things we found from our big national survey about science is that parents know they need something, but they don't know how to fit it in a larger sort of theoretical framework or a schema of how things work. So if I know I need that information about my kids' understanding of balance, where does that fit in the bigger picture of like math concepts and other kinds of spatial relationships, or sense of how it fits into science or something like that. So I don't know if you have the answers.
And we're going to go, I think there was at least one question back there. I know we're about out of time, maybe a bit over, but it's a smart, so.
In thinking about the classroom context in these games and recognizing that the teacher's facilitation of the use of technology is critical. And then we go to assess the value of the game. How do we include or account for the teacher's facilitation beyond measures of self-report or telemetry? Because that seems to potentially moderate or mediate the outcomes.
Expensive, time-consuming researcher observations.
But fun.
But what?
Fun.
But for your studies, you definitely, you trained all people who did, that wasn't up to the teacher to do the games. It was the researchers did it all.
It's a great question, though. If you think of it as an ecosystem with the teacher and the parent and the kid, it's easy for us to get a description of what the kid is doing because it's a digital game. Maybe if a parent is engaging with some kind of digital thing, then we can get measured there. But what's the corresponding piece for the teacher? Great question.
I'm sure you guys will make yourselves available. In person and perhaps even electronically.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.